Happy Halloween, guys. Neil Orfield here, and I'm going to show you how I will be setting up my fantasy cruncher on FanDuel for tonight's single game slate between the Bengals and the Browns. This is for the largest field GPPs on FanDuel. I'm going to be taking some steps here that I would not take if I were setting up for a cash game or a small field GPP. This is for large field GPPs only. First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to change around these columns here the way I like them, and I have a preset quick view that I have saved, showdown settings, that just shows me everything I want to see in the middle of the screen. Ownership projections for each player, projections for each player, my exposures to each player and how much I'm, or my exposure cap, and then also how much I'm getting of each player once I have actually run a crunch. This is what I want to see in the middle of the screen. I'm going to start right away. I'm going to go into the MVP tab up here, and I am going to set a max exposure in the MVP tab of 20%. This is slate dependent. You could set a higher max there tonight, but I think there are still a number of players who could be feasible, particularly given low ownership on some of these guys. Tyler Boyd coming in only owned 5% in the MVP spot. Hayden Hurst 2.6. I think a lot of these guys are viable MVPs tonight. So I am going to be spreading out my exposure to different players in the MVP spot. So I'm setting a max at 20%. And then most of the work I do is going to be in the advanced options. And I'm going to be primarily using the general tab and the groups tab. Starting here in the general tab, unique players per lineup, I'm going to leave at one unique player because I'm making 150 lineups. So my lineups, if they're one player different from each other, I'm totally fine with that. If you're playing 20 or fewer, you might want to set that to 2 unique players per lineup just to have a little bit more diversity within your lineup set. Team salary, I'm going to set a max salary here so that I don't use the full $60,000 salary that FanDuel allows you to use. I set a max salary just to avoid being duplicated. I don't want to have lineups that are used by 100, 200 other people, because then even if you are lucky enough to win, which takes a lot of luck, you will still not win a lot of money. So I want to make lineups that if they are lucky enough to win, I'm going to win, significant money here. And the best way to do that is to avoid being duplicated. I guess the only way to do that is to avoid being duplicated a lot. But one way to avoid the duplication is to set a max salary to make sure that you're not using that full salary cap. It is possible to make lineups that use the full 60,000 and are not going to be duplicated a ton, but it's a lot harder. It's much easier to just leave a little bit of salary on the table. So that's what I'm going to do here. So I'm leaving 1,000 on the table here. It's increments of 500 salary on FanDuel. Sometimes I think some videos have set this at 58,500. Maybe I'll do that here. This is a slate where I think you can stand to leave a little bit of salary on the table because we have Jamar Chase out, we have David Njoku out. We've got some interesting options at lower salaries. So I'll leave 1,500 on the table for this video. Offensive players versus defense. The default is set to max 2 players. I'm going to change this to 4 players. So theoretically, I could have a lineup that has 4 Bengals players in it and just the Browns defense on the other side. I kind of like that today. I think today it's more feasible than some slates just because I think it's possible that this Cleveland offense really struggles against the Bengals defense. It is a home game for Cleveland, so maybe it makes it a little bit less likely, but I still think it's within the realm of possibilities. It's plausible that the Cleveland offense just doesn't do much, and the Cleveland defense, sacks Joe Burrow 3 times, maybe has a pick 6, and is just the highest scorer for Cleveland. So I think changing that to 4 potentially players against the opposing defense makes sense here. All right. Global exposure cap, again, I'm leaving at 100%. You saw I already changed that to 20% in the MVP spot specifically. Normal distribution randomness, I am using 50% randomness. If you are using classic randomness, I would suggest maybe leaving that a little bit lower, maybe use 30%. And also, if you want more control over your lineups, you can use lower randomness. You could even use no randomness at all. Sometimes that might make sense for the way you set up. It's all dependent on how you want to use Fantasy Cruncher. But the way I use it, I allow for some randomness to be inserted into my lineups as long as I'm still getting the exposures that I like to different players, and also they correlate the way I want them to. I don't mind having Fantasy Cruncher mess around with the randomness a little bit. Minimum projection included in calculation. Default is set to 3 fantasy points. So any player who is projected for fewer than 3 fantasy points is not currently included in my player pool. If I'm going to leave this at 3, and if there are players who project for fewer than 3 fantasy points who I do want in my player pool, I'm just going to manually boost their projection to at least 3 fantasy points. And again, players from each team max. Yeah, so I can get up to 4 players from one team against just 1 from the other team. I like leaving that at 4. All right, guys, BetMGM has a no-brainer NBA offer for you that you can access by clicking the link in the description of this video. Once you're on the site, simply put $10 on any pregame moneyline bet, any game. And if either team hits a three-pointer, you'll get $200 in free bets. This offer is available in all states except New York, Pennsylvania, and Mississippi, and all Canadian provinces except Ontario. You've got to take advantage of these no-brainer offers when they come up. Again, just click the link in the description of this video to access the offer. I'm going to go into groups now and create a few groups just around the quarterbacks, starting with Joe Burrow in the MVP spot. I'm going to make him my key player. So this entire group is all about just lineups where Joe Burrow is in the MVP spot. And in those groups, I'm going to go ahead and add all of these Bengals pass catching options to a secondary group. Including tight ends, wide receivers. And for the Bengals, I'm going to include Samaje Perine and Joe Mixon. They're pretty involved in the passing game. Not going to bother with Chris Evans to this group. Okay. So I'm going to require only one player from this group in lineups that have Joe Burrow in the MVP spot. He has rushed for 130 yards and 3 touchdowns this year. I think he has shown enough rushing upside that it's at least plausible that he scores a rushing touchdown or rushes for 40 yards, puts up some points on the ground where he doesn't necessarily need to be bringing a lot of pass catchers, multiple pass catchers along with him to be the optimal captain. However, I am going to, in most lineups where I have Joe Burrow in the MVP spot, I would prefer to have multiple Bengals pass catchers. So I am going to give boost to these players in those lineups as well. And I'll have to see. T. Higgins 15.18. The projection is high enough that maybe I don't want to give him the full boost here. Yeah, I think the projection and the salary is not, prohibitively high. So I think that I am not going to give him the full boost. I don't want him to be in every single lineup where I have Joe Burrow in the MVP spot. And smaller boost to the running backs. Tyler Boyd, I think the price tag is high enough relative to the projection that maybe I can give him a full boost. All right, so I'm calling this the Burrow MVP group. Going to do the same thing now with Jacoby Brissett. Going to make a group that is Jacoby Brissett in the MVP spot at captain. Glad I caught it this time. Last week I screwed this up and I added the quarterback in the wrong spot. But just Jacoby Brissett in the MVP spot as my key player. So this entire group is based around Jacoby Brissett being the MVP, and I'm going to add all of his pass catchers to a secondary group. I'm going to add Kareem Hunt to this group. Debating whether I want to add Nick Chubb. No, I don't think I'm going to add Nick Chubb. I don't think he's involved enough in the passing game. Maybe I'll add Dearness Johnson. Haven't decided what I'm doing exactly with the Browns running backs yet, just because Kareem Hunt on the trading block maybe could theoretically make Dearness Johnson gets a little bit more run. Maybe they don't want to use Kareem Hunt. They haven't said that though. So not something I feel strongly about. Not sure exactly if I'll be taking any stand and getting to a little bit more Dearness Johnson. But for the most part, I'm going to be giving boosts to these wide receivers and tight ends. And because none of these guys project all that great relative to, the pass catching options on the Bengals, I'm going to need to give these wide receivers bigger boosts to make them to get them into lineups if I want to get multiple. So I'm actually going to give pretty significant boosts to these wide receivers. I guess I can check later if these boosts are too much, but I'm going to give them all boosts. because I think if Jacoby Brissett puts up enough fantasy points to be the optimal MVP, that probably means that he is, throwing for multiple touchdowns, and they're probably to multiple receivers. Because if they go to just one receiver, well, then that receiver is probably going to be outscoring Brissett. So I'm going to be giving boosts to all these guys. All right, start there. And then I'm also going to make groups, I think, for debating whether I want to make groups for Burrow and Brissett in the flex spot. I think I will. Maybe not for Joe Burrow. Maybe I'll just make one for Jacoby Brissett. The reason being, Joe Burrow's pass catching options are just going to be in so many of my lineups anyway that, on FanDuel, it is plausible, I think, for Joe Burrow to be optimal in the flex spot without bringing anybody along with him. Like if he rushes for one touchdown and, he can throw for 200 and maybe throws for one touchdown and it's to T. Higgins, who's a little bit more expensive, but T. Higgins, only has 4 catches for 40 yards and a touchdown. Well, T. Higgins still might not be optimal just because of his price tag. That might not be enough for him, but it's enough it'll give a boost to Joe Burrow and then throw in a rushing touchdown and then some more passing yards to other receivers. I think it's plausible for Joe Burrow to be optimal on FanDuel in the flex spot without bringing a pass catcher along with him. So if I have a couple lineups that look like that, I'm not going to be bothered by that. I'm not going to force in a pass catcher with him. But just because they all project so well anyway, I think for the most part, it's not a huge concern for me. So I'm not even going to bother making this rule for Joe Burrow. But because Jacoby Brissett has a lot of pass catchers who just don't project nearly as well as the Bengals options, I am going to say if I have Jacoby Brissett in the flex spot, I'm going to require at least one pass catcher from the Browns as well. So I'm finding here Jacoby Brissett in the flex spot. I'm going to make my key player. And then again, I'm going to add all of his pass catchers. I think it's a lot less likely for Jacoby Brissett to be optimal without bringing along a pass catcher. Maybe I'm thinking about this wrong because when you think about it, because the Browns are more likely to just put up a dud of a game, it's possible that, the optimal Browns player only puts up like 8 fantasy points. And that could certainly be Brissett without bringing somebody else along. If he rushes for 30 yards and then spreads the ball around, get some passing yard points. It's possible I'm thinking about this backwards here, but I think this is the approach I'm going to take. And I'm going to add all of these Browns pass catchers in the MVP spot as well. All right, good enough. I think that's all I'm going to do with this group. I'm just going to say if I've got Jacoby Brissett in the flex spot, I'm requiring at least one pass catcher with him. It's questionable. It really is a questionable. I'm debating whether I want this group. My concern, the reason that I'm making the group is that I think because his projection is so much higher than everybody else on the Browns, I think I could potentially get to a lot of lineups where Jacoby Brissett is my only Browns player, and I don't think I want that many of him. I guess Amari Cooper actually does project better than him. So maybe I'd be any his lower salary. So maybe I'd be more likely to get to Amari Cooper, and then Kareem Hunt is better point per dollar. I'm actually second guessing myself. I think I don't need this group. I don't think it's something I'm going to run into all that often, especially given my salary cap restraints. No, do not delete. Did not mean to do that. Just want to delete this one. Okay. I'm going to see what these look like, and maybe I'll make adjustments. But first, I just want to see what the lineups look like once I crunch them out. All right, so I'm going to crunch out 150 lineups using my projections. Okay, so right away you're seeing Joe Burrow, multiple pass catchers plus Joe Mixon, just Nick Chubb coming back. That looks like a good lineup. That's a surprise to me that Evan McPherson makes it in so early in the crunch. Evan McPherson in the MVP spot. No real correlations there, but I guess it's helpful if his team is moving the ball. So maybe it's good to see the Bengals players, another Bengals onslaught. Here we've got Jacoby Brissett with multiple pass catchers. So it looks like the boost that I gave worked out potentially, that I'm more likely to get multiple pass catchers with Brissett in the MVP spot. So far, I don't see any lineups that correlate horribly. So here's okay. So now we've got 2 in a row here with Jacoby Brissett. So he did make it in as my only Browns player in the flex spot. No pass catchers elsewhere in the lineup. Here's another one. Okay, I'm seeing it. Maybe another one more than I was hoping to. So maybe I should not have deleted that group. I think what I will do is, I don't want to completely disallow the group, but I might go in and say, if you have Jacoby Brissett in the flex spot, give boost to his pass catchers to make it more likely that I have, Browns pass catchers in there with Jacoby Brissett, because I don't want to see, 30 Jacoby Brissett lineups that only have Jacoby Brissett from the Browns. So I'm going to go back and actually add that group back in. Try and do this quickly here. Jacoby Brissett in the flex spot as my key player. Browns player. Just finding every Browns pass catching option, adding to the secondary group. Not including Nick Chubb. Okay, getting there. Good. Okay. So now we've got a group. And now again, for this group, I think I'm only going to apply plus minus adjustments. Again, if I get, a handful of lineups that have Jacoby Brissett as my only Browns player in them, I think I'm okay with that, but I'm going to give a little boost to make it a little bit more likely that, these Browns players, if I've got Jacoby Brissett in the flex spot, I'm more likely to have one of these Browns players than one of the secondary, tertiary options from the Bengals. Okay, good. Let's start there. And I'll crunch again and see if the correlations look better. And of course, the very first one we see, you're seeing too many Jacoby Brissett without any pass catchers right away. Once again, I'm going to go back into my advanced options, go back to that group, give bigger boost to these pass catchers. All right. Guys, BetMGM has a no-brainer NBA offer for you that you can access by clicking the link in the description of this video. Once you're on the site, simply put $10 on any pregame moneyline bet, any game. And if either team hits a three-pointer, you'll get $200 in free bets. This offer is available in all states except New York, Pennsylvania, and Mississippi, and all Canadian provinces except Ontario. You've got to take advantage of these no-brainer offers when they come up. Again, just click the link in the description of this video to access the offer. Still not forcing them, still saying can have lineups that look like this with just Jacoby Brissett and no Browns pass catchers. I'm just trying to make it more likely that I do have Browns pass catchers in lineups where I have Jacoby Brissett. You can see right away here, we see Donovan Peoples-Jones makes it in. Here we've got Brissett in the flex, Donovan Peoples-Jones in the MVP spot. Now, the fact that I did that does make it more likely. You can see my Jacoby Brissett, haven't made any change to his projection. I'm getting to more Jacoby Brissett. Before I was getting 20-something% because I gave those boosts to his pass catchers. Now it's fantasy crunchers liking Jacoby Brissett more because the lineups that have him have higher projections because I've given boosts to his pass catchers. So it does change the entire way your lineups look if you do something like that. So it's a little bit risky to be given too big of boosts there, but still 40% Jacoby Brissett, I'm probably okay with that. And here you can still see I'm still getting a lineup here with Jacoby Brissett in the flex spot and no pass catchers. It's still possible within my lineups, and I don't mind seeing that a few times in a set of 150. Here's another one. I just don't want it to be 30 lineups like that. Here's another one. In general, though, this is looking close enough, more like what I want them to look like, the general lineup sets. I'm going to go through position by position and make sure I'm getting to exposure levels that I like of each player. See, I'm getting to a lot of T. Higgins, Mixon, Burrow in the captain spot. Jacoby Brissett, I'm naturally getting a little bit more because I gave those boosts. Once again, I gave bigger boost to all of his pass catchers in lineups that have Brissett in the MVP spot. And because I'm giving those boosts, it makes those lineups look better to Fantasy Cruncher with the Brissett in the MVP. So I'm getting more of him in the MVP spot. I'm generally okay with that with quarterbacks. Quarterbacks just always have the upside to put up big fantasy days. Getting a 60% Burrow, 40% Brissett. I'm okay with those numbers. I'm going to sort by salary here. Only getting to 12% Nick Chubb. Maybe I want more than 12%. The field's certainly getting to a lot more. Maybe I'd adjust him. Only getting 10% Kareem Hunt. He has only rushed 9 times total over the past 2 weeks. They might be using him a little bit less as they are trying to trade him. I don't really know what the reasoning is there. And now trade deadline is tomorrow. Maybe we'll get some news between now and lock that they're holding him out or that he is no longer in the trading block. Who knows what the news is going to come out as? It's going to affect things as we build this slate out, though. Potentially, if he is on the trading block, maybe I will use less. Maybe I'll be okay with only 10% Kareem Hunt, and maybe I'd give a little boost to Dearness Johnson, get him into my player pool, make sure he has a fantasy projection above 3 fantasy points. I just changed Samaje Perine because I don't want him to have a lower projection than Dearness Johnson necessarily. So I just changed them to the same projection. They're the same salary. I want to have about the same amount of these guys. I think maybe that's even wrong. Maybe I want more Samaje Perine. I don't know exactly how much. Wouldn't have to do much to get above the field on Dearness Johnson, and he's a guy who's certainly could get like 0 carries today. He might not be involved at all. So you got to factor that in as you're making these decisions. But I'm not going to make any huge adjustments here. Maybe I'll give a thumbs up to Nick Chubb, make it a little bit more likely that I get him. And a thumbs up to Nick Chubb because he has a projection of 14 fantasy points, and it's an 8% projection boost. So that's like, can't do the math off the top of my head, something like 1.2 fantasy point boost to his projection, give or take 0.1. I don't know. It's somewhere in that range of Nick Chubb's projection. So it is a pretty significant boost just to give him 1 thumbs up at this kind of projection. T. Higgins getting to only 35%. I guess that's because he is the most expensive receiver, and I did put a salary cap on there, but I'm still getting too close to the field. Tyler Boyd, again, he's different than DraftKings, where his salary is really low relative to his projection. On FanDuel, they actually gave him a relatively high salary, so the projection doesn't look quite as good. So yeah, only 9% Tyler Boyd. That might be a mistake, but the field's getting the 23%. I'll have to think about how much more I want. I'll give him a little boost here. Amari Cooper getting to 20%. Same thing. He's a wide receiver 1 for the Browns. Probably want to get more there. Donovan Peoples-Jones getting to way over the field. Don't need to do anything to get above that. David Bell, only 5.7% projected ownership. I think I like that. I think I'd like to get above that number on David Bell. Maybe I'll give him a thumbs up. Mike Thomas, very interesting. Again, Jamar Chase not playing tonight. Mike Thomas likely sees a bigger role than we're used to. Still only getting 14% projected ownership. On FanDuel, more so than DraftKings, it doesn't take much for a player to get into the optimal lineup. Really just 1 touchdown. That's all it would take. Even Trent Taylor has 1 10-yard touchdown at 5,000. He's not necessarily making it into the optimal lineup, but it's certainly more likely on FanDuel than DraftKings because it's only half point PPR on FanDuel. So the guys who are less involved, it's a little bit easier to sneak in there. You also don't get bonuses for things like yardage and stuff like that. So it's easier to get into the lineup, into the optimal lineup on FanDuel with just a single touchdown, although it is only 5 players instead of 6. I think sometimes these secondary, tertiary guys tend to go a little bit under on these guys who are, pretty unlikely to get there, but the salaries look a little bit higher, but I think it takes a little bit less just because of the lack of PPR. So I kind of like those guys sometimes. And tight end, Hayden Hurst, again, he could also see a bigger workload with Jamar Chase out. Maybe they focus a little bit more on the known quantities. So don't mind getting to a lot of Hayden Hurst. Harrison Bryant stepping in. Now he is the tight end 1 with David Njoku out. Maybe I want to get a little bit above this 12%. I think I will. Maybe even want more than 18%. He might be a stand that I take. Haven't decided. Again, these are decisions I'm not really making right now. I'm just kind of showing you my thought process as I go through. Want to make sure these guys are at least in my player pool. Pharaoh Brown's going to look pretty interesting because he's now, in the mix there at tight end for the Browns. Maybe I'll give him a little bit of a bigger boost. I guess Miller Forrestal too. Now I changed these projections to the exact same thing. I will probably get more of Pharaoh Brown here than Miller Forrestal just because he projects now better point per dollar because he's cheaper than Miller Forrestal. And that's my preference anyway, because if you look at what our projections were, Pharaoh Brown projects better than Miller Forrestal. We have a bigger projection for him. So changing these to the same projection for now. Maybe I'll end up giving Pharaoh Brown the even bigger projection later on, but just want to see how things look when I crunch it out. Currently not getting to any of Cade York. I think I'd like to get to some. Man, that is not a high projection for a kicker. Rare that you see a projection so low for a kicker. I think I'd like to get to some, though. So I'll give a little boost. And DST, I think that I definitely want more of these defenses. I'm going to give, it's going to take more than a thumbs up here. I think I'm going to have to actually give a little boost to the projections to get a little bit more. And then I'll crunch again and see what comes out. And again, Joe Burrow in the MVP spot with just one pass catcher. I don't mind seeing that in some lineups, in general, because I've given boosts to the pass catchers in lineups that have Joe Burrow at MVP. I'm going to get more of Bengals pass catchers, but I'm okay with that for now. In a handful of lineups, I don't mind having Joe Burrow at MVP with just one pass catcher in the flex. I don't want to see a ton of it, though. Let's see, when I've got Joe Burrow in the MVP spot. Okay, so for the most part, I am seeing multiple pass catchers for the Bengals when I have Joe Burrow in the MVP spot. So that is my preference. There was another correlation that I was going to look at here, and I'm forgetting what it was now. Okay, we can see here Joe Burrow. I did not make a group for Joe Burrow in the flex spot to give any kind of boost to his pass catches. So that might be what I'm seeing here. I'm getting to not as much T. Higgins and Tyler Boyd as I thought I would because I did not give them boost. And I did give boost to all of the Browns pass catchers when I have Jacoby Brissett in the lineup. Still getting to a decent amount, though. Okay. In general, I'd say these lineups look good enough. They look like they correlate well enough for me. Usually when I've got Joe Burrow in the MVP spot, multiple pass catchers. If I've got Joe Burrow in the flex spot, at least one pass catcher somewhere. Seen some where we don't, but good to see that in general they are correlating the way I want them to. I want to check out my Jacoby Brissett MVP lineups. All right, so right away you see Jacoby Brissett MVP with just Dearness Johnson. Don't want to see too many lineups that look like that. Okay, I've only got 3 lineups total that have Jacoby Brissett in the MVP spot and Dearness Johnson at running back. So I'm okay with that. Okay. Yeah, I'm blanking on. I thought there was another correlation that I wanted to look at here, but I'm blanking on what it was. So I'm just gonna go through my usual process. Yeah, getting to more of the defenses now. That looks a little bit better to me. Maybe I want more than this, but at least I have more than I was getting previously. Still not getting to a ton of Cade York. Maybe that's a good thing. He does not project all that well for us. I probably want more than 3%. I don't know exactly how much I'm going to want, but maybe change that projection slightly. In general, I recommend, if you have not done this before, if you're new to Fantasy Cruncher or new to DFS, certainly I would recommend using thumbs up than actually changing projections the way I am, because the projections are, the best in the business. They're a great starting place for your lineups. Whenever I am making changes, I am keeping in mind what the original projections were, how players did project relative to each other. I want to keep those things in mind. Sometimes you have to make little projection changes to get to different exposure levels that you like. And of course, if a player does project for fewer than 3 fantasy points, then you have to at least get them above that 3 threshold to get them into your player pool. But in general, you can use the thumbs up and thumbs down to give 8% boosts or negative boosts, depending on if you want more or less of certain players. T. Higgins, okay, getting a little bit more in this one. Tyler Boyd still not getting a ton. Maybe give him a little bit of a bigger boost. David Bell is still getting under the field. I'll give him another thumbs up. 0 Trent Taylor. Maybe I'll give him a couple thumbs up. 14% Dearness Johnson. Probably don't need that much. Interesting. I'm getting 14% Dearness Johnson, 4% Samaje Perine. That is probably a result of the fact that I gave boosts to Dearness Johnson in lineups that have Jacoby Brissett. Maybe I need to give Samaje Perine a slightly bigger section here, because I'd rather, I think, have more Samaje Perine than Dearness Johnson. He is, owned higher, but he's just much more likely to hit than Dearness Johnson is. Dearness Johnson really might not even see the field. So see what comes out now. Okay, still getting a little bit more Dearness Johnson than Samaje Perine. Anyway, I'm not going to go through my entire process here, just kind of showing you the things I'm thinking about as I'm looking at these things. Maybe now I would adjust Perine a little bit higher, because I'd rather get to more of him than Dearness Johnson. I go incrementally looking at this position by position. How much do I get of different players? How much do I want? Do I want more? Do I want less? Yeah, I'm blanking on what I was going to say about correlation. I was going to look at a certain correlation within my lineups and think about giving a boost positive. Oh, one thing that I was thinking about doing is, because I'm playing this game of thinking about is Kareem Hunt going to play or not? Maybe I don't want lineups that have both Kareem Hunt and Dearness Johnson, because Dearness Johnson really only becomes relevant if Kareem Hunt is not playing his full workload. So maybe I want to think about, do I need to make a group that has that says just one of those 2 players? I'm not getting enough Kareem Hunt right now that it's really a huge concern anyway. But that's a group that I would think about making. Go into my running backs, look at my Kareem Hunt lineups. Yeah, currently not getting to any Kareem Hunt with Dearness Johnson anyway, so not a concern. But if you were thinking about, well, maybe you do want to play, some that have with the thought process that Kareem Hunt is playing his full workload, and then some that you're using the thought process that Dearness Johnson is going to get his workload instead because Kareem Hunt is on the trading block. Maybe you do something like this. You give Kareem Hunt a little bit of a boost, and also go in to advanced options, groups, create a new group. Just say have Kareem Hunt in the lineup. So I added Kareem Hunt in both the flex and the MVP spot. Dearness Johnson to the secondary group, and then say if any key player use at most 0. So now just say not getting to any Dearness Johnson in lineups that have Kareem Hunt in them. You could also just give a negative boost to Dearness Johnson. Maybe you want to allow for a couple of things get super weird. Happens on Showdown. But you could just say, if you have Kareem Hunt in the lineup, no Dearness Johnson. I think that would be a reasonable group to make. And now you can crunch out 150 lineups. You can see that I, gave a little boost to Kareem Hunt's projection. So hopefully I get a little bit more Kareem Hunt. Yep, got to more Kareem Hunt. But in lineups that have Kareem Hunt, no Dearness Johnson. I made that group. So that's something you could think about, the kind of group that you can make if you want to play for different scenarios happening in a game. Anyway, that is going to do it for this. Later on I will crunch out several more times. I'm not finished with my crunches just yet. I'll probably crunch 10 more times before I find the set of lineups that I like. I make changes incrementally, looking at my exposure levels, looking at the lineups themselves to make sure they correlate well enough. And that's really all I do. And, you just work in the groups to make sure the correlations work, and then look at, these settings, looking position by position and the projections here and the exposures to make sure that you're getting to exposure levels that you like. That's really all it takes to make good lineups for these single game slates. Anyway, good luck tonight. Hope you can find some success using this or a similar process.